Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a snapshot of the world right now. It's February 2026, and we are going to challenge the single biggest assumption in the tech industry.
An assumption that, let's be honest, most of us have been running with for the last few years.
Absolutely. It's this idea that the war is over, that companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, the creators of ChatGPT and Claude, are the undisputed kings of the hill. We just look at them and think, okay, they won. Game over.
And it really feels that way on the surface, doesn't it? I mean, you see ChatGPT integrated into everything. People talk about Claude like it's their coworker. The narrative is just, the dust has settled. These guys are permanent.
Exactly. But today, we are going to completely undercut that idea. Our deep dive is based on a fascinating and frankly kind of alarming new analysis of the landscape. And the central thesis is, well, it's jarring. It suggests that despite being household names, despite the billions in investment, these pioneers might actually be fighting for their sheer survival right now.
It sounds hyperbolic. Like you hear that and you think it's just clickbait. But when you strip away all the hype and just look at the cold, hard numbers, the financial and competitive reality of 2026 versus, say, 2024, the ground has shifted violently.
So our mission today is to unpack what our source is calling the AI profit paradox. It's this really sticky situation where the original pioneers, OpenAI and Anthropic, are just getting squeezed.
And it is a brutal squeeze. We're not talking about, a dip in stock price. We are talking about an existential threat to their actual business model.
They're getting pressured from the top by the old school tech giants, and then they're getting swarmed from the bottom by open source and international developers.
Which brings us to the big question, right?
Yeah.
The core tension for today's discussion is, how do these companies stay solvent? How do they keep the lights on and pay off these massive, massive debts when the market is converging so fast? It's a very different game for them than it is for everyone else.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I think for a lot of people listening, that might feel strange. We see ChatGPT everywhere. It feels like they're printing money. So why are we even talking about survival? Is the debt really that bad?
It's not just the debt itself. It's the kind of debt when you compare it to their rivals. You have to look at who OpenAI and Anthropic are actually up against. They're main rivals now. They're not other startups. It's Google, it's xAI, it's Meta.
The heavy hitters. The trillion-dollar club.
The absolute heaviest. And just think about the difference in their business models. Google has search and YouTube. Meta has Instagram and WhatsApp.
Right.
These are massive existing revenue streams. They're basically infinite money glitches. They have billions coming in every single month from ads, from hardware. They just don't have that same crushing urgency to make the AI itself profitable. Not right away.
Right. So if Meta burns, $10 billion on AI research this year, Mark Zuckerberg just shrugs. It's a research expense. But if OpenAI burns $10 billion...
They have to show a return. OpenAI and Anthropic are what we call pure plays. They don't have a search engine or a social network to subsidize them. They have investors. They have lenders, and those people expect the AI product itself to pay back the loans used to build those massive data centers.
So they can't just rely on you and me paying $20 a month for a chatbot anymore. That's not enough to service the debt.
Not even close. Not at the scale they're operating at now. The infrastructure costs are just astronomical. To survive, they have to move way, way beyond the consumer chatbot.
And for Anthropic.
Same story. They have to move way beyond just being a coding assistant for developers. They need the whales.
They're talking about enterprise contracts.
High-end enterprise. I'm talking healthcare systems, the Department of Defense, heavy education contracts, big government deals. These are the sectors with the deep pockets that can sustain the kind of revenue these companies need just to keep the lights on.
Okay, so the strategy seems clear. It's business 101. Go where the money is. Sell to hospitals and the Pentagon. So what's the problem?
The problem is, they're not the only ones with that idea. And more importantly, they are walking into territory that's already occupied. Google, xAI, Meta, they're not just sitting on the sidelines watching OpenAI try to walk into these markets.
No, they're aggressively defending these spaces.
Exactly. That makes sense.
Sure.
Right? Google's been in schools and hospitals with cloud and workspace for years.
Decades, almost.
So if you're a hospital CIO, and all your patient data is already sitting on Google Cloud, and Google comes to you and offers a KeyP-compliant AI integration that's just built right in.
Yeah. Are you really going to go through the headache of procurement for a third-party vendor like Anthropic?
Probably not. It's a much harder sell.
Unless, and okay, this brings us to the next logical thought. I'm going to play devil's advocate. If I'm the CEO of OpenAI, I'm saying, sure, Google has the relationships, but we have the better product. We have the smartest AI. We were first. Quality wins. Doesn't that first mover advantage save them?
And here is where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the scary part for them. The source material dives deep into what it calls the better model fallacy.
The idea that just being smarter is a permanent moat around your castle.
Right. And, in 2023 or 2024, that was totally true. GPT-4 was just head and shoulders above everyone else. It was like comparing a Ferrari to a bicycle. But as of right now, February 2026, that advantage isn't just shrinking, it is rapidly evaporating.
Evaporating is a strong word. You're saying the difference is basically gone.
The data really backs it up. The gap between the benchmark leaders, the absolute best proprietary models, and all the competing AIs is narrowing to the point of being statistical noise.
I want to get into the specific numbers here because the source laid out a ton of benchmarks, and I think hearing the actual stats, it just drives this point home. We need to understand how close this race has become.
Let's do it. It paints a very, very clear picture.
Okay, let's start with the chatbot arena. This has always been the gold standard for user preference, right? It's not some abstract test. It's actual people voting on which model gave them a better answer.
Exactly. It uses an ELO rating, just like in chess. A higher number means you win more head-to-head matchups. It's probably the best metric for how a model feels to a real person.
So looking at the data from 2024 to today in 2026, the ELO difference between the number 1 model and the number 10 model used to be pretty significant. It was 11.9%.
That's a huge gap. In chess, that's the difference between a grandmaster and a decent club player. You would notice the difference immediately.
But now that gap has shrunk to 5.4%. But here's the stat that it blew my mind. The gap between the number 1 and number 2 model is now less than 0.7%.
Think about that. Less than 1%. If you were chatting with these models blindfolded, you literally could not tell the difference between the market leader and the runner-up. It's a coin flip.
It's wild. But okay, maybe chatting is too subjective. Let's look at something harder. ARC-AGI-2. This tests abstract reasoning, right? Puzzles the AI has never seen before.
Yes, this is supposed to be the IQ test for machines. It tests generalization, not just memorization.
And the gap there between the number 1 and number 2 models narrowed from 30 points all the way down to just 8.9 points.
That is a massive compression. I mean, you're seeing the trend here. The lead is just shrinking drastically across the board.
Here's another one. Humanity's Last Exam. Which, by the way, what a terrifying name for a benchmark. Sounds like a sci-fi movie.
Very dramatic, yeah. But it's designed to be the hardest test available.
And on this hardest test, the gap between the top 3 contenders dropped from 15 points down to just 6 points.
So again, the top 3 are all bunched together. There is no clear outlier anymore.
And for all the developers listening, let's talk code. SWE Bench verified. This tests software engineering capabilities, fixing bugs, writing features.
This is Anthropic's bread and butter. This is where Claude has always dominated.
Well, the gap between the 1st and the 10th ranked models on that test compressed from 40 points down to 12 points.
Wow. That one is particularly damaging. If the 10th best model is only marginally worse than the best one,
yeah,
why are you paying premium prices for the best one?
Exactly. And just to round this out, let's look at GPQA. This is graduate-level science questions, PhD stuff. The difference between the proprietary leaders like GPT and Claude and the top open weights models is now only 4 to 6%.
I want to pause on that term open weights for a second because it's so crucial. These are models where the underlying parameters are public. You can download them. You can run them on your own private servers, often for free or, very cheap.
So you're telling me the free version, the one I can download and run myself, is now only 4% dumber than the billion-dollar model?
That, to me, is the killer stat. If you're a business, do you pay millions for that extra 4% on a science test? Or do you take the free model that is 96% as good and run it securely on your own hardware?
It's the generic drug effect. Tylenol is great, but the store brand acetaminophen is chemically identical and costs a third of the price.
Precisely. Intelligence is becoming a commodity.
Yeah.
The moat, that defensive ditch around the castle, it's gone. In 2024, the moat was, our model is a genius and yours is an idiot. In 2026, the moat is what? Marketing.
That's a terrifying prospect for a company with billions in debt. But I want to push back again. We talked about the high-end market defense, health. Maybe they do need that extra 4%. Maybe 4% saves lives in a hospital.
That's a fair point. In really high-stakes environments, you absolutely pay for the best.
But what about the rest of the world? What about the mid-tier and low-end markets? This is, roughly 70% of the entire enterprise space? The small and medium businesses, the everyday developers who just need code completion. Surely OpenAI can just sweep that up with volume sales.
You'd think so. But this is where the second part of the squeeze comes in. Remember, we just talked about those open weights models closing the gap.
Right, the 4-6% difference.
Well, the source material predicts that this massive chunk of the market, that 70%, is very likely going to be dominated by two groups. First, Chinese developers, and second, an unexpectedly huge number of open source startups.
Chinese developers have been crushing it lately on efficiency and price.
They have, because they had restricted access to the absolute best chips for a while. They got really, really good at doing more with less. Now they are releasing models that are incredibly cheap to run, but perform at that good enough tier.
And good enough is now basically indistinguishable from the best.
Exactly. And then you have the open source startups. These are smaller, really nimble teams taking those open weight models we mentioned, like the latest Llama releases from Meta or others, and fine-tuning them for super specific tasks.
So instead of a general God brain that costs a fortune to run, I can just buy a small specialized legal brain or an HR brain for peanuts.
Yes, and it runs locally, so your data never ever leaves your building. That is a massive selling point for any company that's conscious about privacy.
So visualize the battlefield for me. It really sounds like a trap.
It is. It's a classic pincer movement. At the top of the hill, you have Google, Meta, and xAI blocking the high-value contracts with their cache piles and their existing ecosystems.
Right.
And at the bottom of the hill, rushing up, you have this swarm of Chinese and open source developers just eating up the volume market with cheap, high-quality alternatives.
And OpenAI and Anthropic are stuck right in the middle.
Stuck in the middle with a mountain of debt.
It really is a profit paradox.
Yeah.
They need the high end to pay the debt, but the giants are already there. They need the volume to sustain their growth, but the cheap alternatives are just undercutting them at every turn.
And that leads to this sentiment in the source material that I found really striking. The author, who is usually a pretty analytical, unemotional writer, admits to this genuine sense of bafflement.
Bafflement, like they just don't see the exit.
Yes. They literally say, I struggle with this. I don't see a path to sustained profitability. It's not just that it's a difficult challenge. It's that right now there is no visible path through this maze for them.
That is heavy. We're so used to tech companies just finding a way, the pivot, right? But how do you pivot when the very product you make is becoming free everywhere else?
That really raises an important question about the business model itself. The model of we build the giant brain and we rent access to you, that only works when you're the only one with a giant brain. It breaks down when everyone has one in their pocket.
It reminds me of long-distance calling. Remember when that used to cost a fortune?
Oh, absolutely. I remember timing calls to my relatives to save money.
Right. And then VoIP happened, the internet happened, and suddenly the cost of sending voice data just dropped to zero. And the companies whose entire business model was, we charge you to talk to someone in London, they vanished. Or they had to become internet service providers.
That's a perfect analogy. OpenAI and Anthropic are trying to sell long-distance minutes in a world that is rapidly switching to Skype.
But the difference is, the old phone companies didn't have this kind of massive, frantic debt accumulation that we're seeing now. They were established utilities.
Correct. And let's not forget the speed of this change. We're talking about a transition from 2024 to 2026.
Yeah.
2 years. The convergence happened so much faster than anyone predicted.
The stats we read earlier, closing a 30-point gap down to an 8-point gap in that time frame, I mean, that is just exponential improvement by the competitors.
And it suggests the ceiling is being hit. The leaders are slowing down their games. They're getting diminishing returns, while the followers are catching up at an incredible rate. That's what convergence looks like.
So if you are sitting in the boardroom at OpenAI or Anthropic right now, what are you talking about? Are you panicking?
You have to be talking about differentiation. But true differentiation, not just, oh, our model scores 2 points higher on a math test. You're talking about what vertical integration maybe, or proprietary data deals that no one else can get.
Yeah.
But even then, is it enough to beat Google?
Google, who owns YouTube and Search and Android. They have the data.
And xAI have X and Tesla data. Meta has Facebook and Instagram data. What is the unique data advantage for the pure AI labs?
It used to be talent and focus. They had all the smartest researchers in one room.
But talent moves, and focus doesn't pay the bank.
It's a really sobering reality check. We get so caught up in the hype cycle, the new model release, new features, voice mode, video generation. We forget to look at the boring balance sheet stuff.
But the balance sheet is what determines who is still here in 5 years.
So let's wrap this up. We've established that this Kings of the Hill narrative is, well, it's outdated. It's 2026, and the hill is crowded.
Very crowded, and it's getting flatter every single day.
We've seen the numbers. The performance gap between the best models and the rest of the pack has collapsed. A 0.7% difference in chat performance is, for a user, effectively zero.
And a 4–6% difference between a proprietary model and an open source one is negligible for most businesses.
And we've identified the squeeze. They're blocked at the top by the cash-rich giants like Google and Meta, and they're being undercut at the bottom by Chinese devs and open source.
And hanging over all of it is the debt, the obligation to make a profit in a market that is actively driving prices towards zero.
It really makes you rethink the future of this whole industry. We always assume consolidation means the big guys win, but in this case, the big guys might end up being the old tech giants, not the new AI darlings.
It's a very distinct possibility. The AI revolution might happen, but the companies that actually started it might not be the ones who own the future of it.
That is a wild thought.
It's the classic pioneer problem. Pioneers get the arrows, the settlers get the land.
I love that quote. Well, I don't love it for them, but it's a great image.
It's the history of tech in a nutshell.
So here's a final thought for you listening to this. We want to leave you with something to mull over. We spent this whole time talking about how intelligence is becoming a commodity. The performance gap is vanishing.
Right.
So if the top 10 models are basically identical in performance, what exactly are we paying for when we subscribe to one of them?
That's the billion-dollar question. Are you paying for the intelligence, or are you just paying for the brand name?
Is it like buying a designer t-shirt versus a generic one? The cotton is the same, the stitching is the same. One just costs 5 times as much because of the logo on the chest.
And if that's the case, how long does that brand loyalty really last in the tech world?
So next time you open up your favorite AI tool, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, ask yourself this. Is this actually better, or is it just better marketed?
And if you switch to the number 10 model on the list, would you even notice?
Try it and see. You might be surprised. That's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you in the next one.
Stay curious.